Baldur's Gate 3. This is one of the best RPGs you can ever play. And after beating it late last year, wrapping up the new epilogue content that was added in a post-launch patch, I personally thought that Baldur's Gate 3 would be getting DLC. No spoilers, but I just felt that things were a little open-ended where maybe you could pick up some threads and continue the story. And make no mistake, Larian definitely had plans for that. But we've just learned through Game Developer Conference that not only is Baldur's Gate 3 not getting DLC, there's no Baldur's Gate 4, and Larian is getting ready to move on to their next game. We're going to talk about the rationale behind this, what this means, and what they could possibly be working on next. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here and you're into what Larian's up to, whether it's now or in the future, you're in the right place. We've been covering them since Divinity Original Sin 1. Consider subscribing. So let's start off at the top with an article from IGN where they write, Larian Studios won't make Baldur's Gate 3 DLC, expansions, or Baldur's Gate 4. At a Game Developers Conference panel today, Larian Studios founder Swen Vincke dropped something of a bombshell by revealing that the developer isn't planning to release any expansions or DLC for Baldur's Gate 3, nor a Baldur's Gate 4. Instead, Vincke said at the panel, Larian plans to move away from Dungeons & Dragons entirely and do something new, leaving the IP in publisher Wizard of the Coast's hands. This is a significant deal because of two things. Number one, the business sensibility behind it. I think many of us assumed that we would get Baldur's Gate 3 DLC simply because the game did extremely well. And Larian has made fantastic games in the past, don't get it twisted, but none of them received the much-deserved attention until Baldur's Gate 3. Like, I adore Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2. I wish more people play it. I also understand why some of the more modern design sensibilities of Baldur's Gate 3 brought more fans into the fold. If I were to wager a guess, one of the reasons they want to get away from Dungeons & Dragons is I would probably look at what leaked from Insomniac. We can't show it on screen, unfortunately, but what we learned through that is, and I know it's Disney and Marvel, so it's a little bit different here, but a massive cut is typically taken in these licensed game deals, and that chips into your overall revenue. It's possible on a business sensibility side, Larian saying, hey, we got the popularity, we got the talent, and when we got our big payday, I'm sure they made a ton of money, don't get it twisted, but I'm sure they're looking at that thinking, imagine if that was entirely our own thing. Especially now as the industry's growing, RPGs of all kinds are widely celebrated, whether it's turn-based, isometric, it can be as hardcore as Baldur's Gate 3, and it's the biggest game of the year. That's pretty impressive to see how far we have come, where originally these games would just be overlooked and kind of hidden gems. So I think it's smart that Larian's going to double down and invest on themselves. But I mentioned earlier, I said that Baldur's Gate 3 was going to get DLC. That was not just me saying it or thinking it based on what the story had presented in the end. This is something Larian had confirmed themselves. Let's see what they had to say in another article from IGN where they write, Larian started work on Baldur's Gate 3 DLC, then canceled it. The studio was elated. Quote, because of all of the success, the obvious thing would have been to do a DLC, so we started on one. We even started thinking about Baldur's Gate 4, Vincke says, but we hadn't really had the closure on Baldur's Gate 3 yet, and just to jump forward on something new felt wrong. We had also spent a whole bunch of time converting the system into a video game, and we wanted to do new things. There's a lot of constraints on making D&D, and 5th edition is not an easy system to put into a video game. We had all these ideas of new combat we wanted to try out, and they were not compatible. When the time came to make DLC though, Vincke says Larian was going through the motions. You could see the team was doing it because everyone felt we had to do it, but it wasn't really coming from the heart. And we're very much a studio from the heart. It's what's gotten us into misery, and it's also been the reasons for our success. Two major threads to pull here. Number one of the reasons they're walking away is they actually found the D&D system limiting for what they wanted to do. Obviously, when you play Baldur's Gate 3, limit is not the word you would attach to it. It's limitless, truly. Like, you can do anything, go anywhere, skill check, anything. It's ridiculous, but they have more ideas beyond that. And I understand, because one of the things, and I know it was many years ago at this point in time, but I remember when Baldur's Gate 3 was first revealed and I made my first video on it. One of the big talking points surrounding the early days of the game with early access was Baldur's Gate 3 was just a Divinity Original Sin 2 ripoff, which is hilarious to look back on now that people were actually saying that. I actually made a video talking exactly about that and how I didn't really agree with the sentiment. And even if it were that, Divinity Original Sin 2 is so fantastic, I don't know why anyone would complain anyway. But there's no denying that there were similarities between the two. And if I were to use the term restricted loosely, you don't have to be restricted by a specific gameplay system, and they can go chase after in a new series or evolve an existing one with these gameplay ideas that they had. So what's very interesting here to see is one thing that Larian's done that's won them a lot of favor with fans is making decisions that typically companies don't make, because you're turning away from easy money and earning good fan support in the process. So yes, making DLC is an easy slam dunk when it comes to your financial success. For them to say the heart wasn't there, I respect that a ton. I feel we don't get that enough nowadays. We're in a day and age where every game needs tons of sequels, spin-offs, prequels. We're so hesitant to move on to the next thing, especially in video games in an era of remakes and remasters. We're so scared to move on to the next thing because everyone's so terrified of failure. I like that they understand their core values here, which is, hey, Baldur's Gate 3 may have just been a lightning in a bottle moment. We got to keep moving. And also, Swen Vincke had some great words on why they're moving in this direction on his Twitter account. So let's read those next. Counter expectations, but I've never been more sure about a strategy shift. This is the right thing for Larian, he wrote. I understand there will be disappointment because people fell in love with what we created, but it was a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and it doesn't need more. The team has grown a lot during Baldur's Gate 3, and I think you can be very excited with what that growth means for our next game. So there's level of confidence here, which is always great to see. I don't know if after the epilogue stuff, I totally agree with like beginning, middle, and end. Like, yes, the story does have that. I think the story really for Baldur's Gate 3 truly begins in the middle with Act 2. That's just my personal take, as I mentioned in my review. And also, when it comes to, again, that epilogue, I feel like there were some open threads there where it definitely felt like there was going to be more. But I also respect that they're saying, hey, we've grown, we've concluded this, we're ready to move on, and we think that what we do next is going to be sick. And we actually have a very small inkling of what that could be coming up in the pipeline. And also, I just have a personal desire I'm going to express. So what we have here is finally an article from GameSpot.com where they say Baldur's Gate 3 dev is working toward an RPG that dwarfs it. They write here, speaking to GameSpot at GDC, Vincke explained that Larian's next game also won't actually be the aforementioned very big RPG, but it will be another step toward realizing it. Quote, I think there is some tech that we don't have yet, and I don't know what the specs are on the next gen of gaming systems yet, but I hope it's going to bring us closer, end quote. So there is a very much long-term North Star vision of the, quote, very big RPG. To make it clear, what they're moving on from Baldur's Gate 3 to this next game is not the big RPG. And he says they need something from the next generation of systems to even start thinking about. So what does come up in the pipeline next? My dream game from Larian, something sci-fi related. I would love their own IP in a sci-fi world. I think with how they write characters and how creative they are and just the systems they build, a sci-fi game from them would be absolute peak as someone who loves specifically sci-fi stuff. If I were to give them another licensed product, Star Wars, I would lose my mind, because if there's any developer that I think could make a game that's better than KOTOR, I haven't had a new favorite game of all time since 2003. It's been a while. I always am looking to shake things up a bit. And if there's one company that could usurp the throne for KOTOR, it would be Larian with their own Star Wars game. So that would be a licensed game dream for sure for me. So we got two sci-fi picks, but I think another excellent pick here that would also make me lose my mind with how far this company has come, and thinking of some of the tech that they've made for Baldur's Gate 3 that they could implement in this next game, is Divinity Original Sin 3. I think there's a sort of full circle moment here of taking home all that success and bringing Divinity Original Sin to the next level, right? You look at how great, if you've played them, Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 are, especially 2, some fantastic role-playing systems like the tag system and how the dialogue evolves as you utilize specific options more and more, and that tailors your build further. Like, it's just so much character work there. And a lot of the dialogue, I think, for people is not interesting because you're viewing it from the sky. I look at what's happening with Baldur's Gate 3 and how imagining a Divinity Original Sin game in that style would go so far for me personally. But nonetheless, that's not the, quote, very big RPG. But if I were to wager a guess, I wouldn't be too surprised if Larian really wanted to go back home, so to speak, and give Divinity Original Sin this final entry that is everything they wanted to give it in the first 2 entries. It's not going to be crowdfunded or kickstarted. It's going to be by them, then done in early access, updated for years and years, creating that pipeline, and then releasing another masterpiece. I think that's going to be the rhythm here, but we'll see what series it ends up being. I just can't wait. And certainly they've earned the trust. For me, I already knew that Baldur's Gate 3 was going to be fantastic just from the 2 games I had played from them prior. But I'm sure for a lot of people, they're just ready, willing, and eager to see what's next. And again, I really respect that when the money's on the table here, they're able to move on. What I always say, though, is, for example, when Arrowhead's CEO, Helldivers 2 developer, for those who don't know, sat down and was like, don't buy the game until the servers are fixed. I'm like, that's probably because they already made all their money and then some. Like, they can afford to tell you, like, chill, we're going to fix this, we're good. I think the same thing here with Larian. Like, they don't really need the DLC. They already made small games. They ran through Kickstarter a lot. They have so much money in the war chest now. They don't need a Baldur's Gate 3 DLC. They have the option to walk away. And I wonder what they would do if they were in a more desperate position, but that's not what's happening in reality. So just a little food for thought, but ultimately Swen Vincke is like the ideal CEO for a game developer, if you will, like a guy who's just very invested in the project, very creatively driven, and making decisions based on that, not on the money signs. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's your Baldur's Gate 3 update. No DLC, no expansions, no Baldur's Gate 4. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts down below. Fire away. Other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.